Please be seated. I'm going to start talking about the miracles of Jesus. We kind of started this last week, and it kind of flows right in. And the first one is the wedding at Cana. And so we'll be doing these for a little period of time. We're going to break, though, after today. We're going to do more traditional Palm Sunday, Good Friday, and Easter. And then we'll go back to the miracles of Jesus. The scripture readings this morning from John 2, 1 through 12. And Jesus changes water into wine. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you," which is actually the point where a lot of biblical scholars said Mary pushed him out of the nest. Mary knew all along who Jesus was, and she said, "It's time." They're run out of wine, and that doesn't mean go to the 7-Eleven and buy some Diet Coke. That meant it's time to let yourself be known, and that's why Jesus said, "Woman, why do you involve me?" And she said, "Get out." Not figuratively, but it's time. It's time to let yourself be known. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have drunk too much. But you've saved the best till last." I think people still do that, don't they? What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after that, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, where they stayed for a few days. Now that's the first recorded miracle of Jesus. And I think it's interesting the way it says. And it says what Jesus did here in Cana was the first of his signs revealed through which his glory was revealed. And like I said, Mary was the one that said, "It's time." Right? There are many interpretations of the gospel that use the word sign kind of interchangeably with miracles. I don't know if you noticed, but it was weird, right? As I said miracles, the sun came out and came through the windows. I don't think that was me, but it was kind of interesting. Weddings are full of signs. Okay? And everybody that's married or been to a wedding knows. Lots of visible elements that point to a bigger thing that's really going on. Right? The walk down the aisle is symbolic. The father symbolically giving away the bride. It's no longer my problem, she's yours. Okay? Giving away your daughter. The rings. Okay? And I will tell you a personal pet peeve of mine is when you get to a wedding and the priest or the pastor says, "The ring is round. It is a symbol of eternal love." Well, the ring is round. Duh, that's why it fits on your finger. If it was square, it wouldn't fit. Why do we have to tell them a ring is round? We know the ring is round. Okay? But the candles, the presence of Christ, or the symbolic unity candle, or the sand ceremony, or whatever ceremonies they use of the two becoming one. Weddings are full of them. And Jesus used the small signs in his first miracle to try to drop hints maybe about what his ministry would be. One mystery still remains, and that is whose wedding were they at? Nobody knows. And nobody really knows why Jesus was there. Right? Now, some would say Mary seems to be kind of acting in the capacity as a family member. She's kind of given some directions and things. And at the end of the passage, it says that Jesus and his mother and brothers went to Capernaum. And it leads you to believe that all of his brothers were there as well. Okay? So Jesus' whole family was there. So it wasn't a family member. Whose wedding was it? But it would make you think it was probably someone that their family was close to. Right? The water is also a symbol, and the water is a symbol of the new creation. Okay? Genesis 1:2, the Spirit was hovering over the water. Before church, I had the pleasure of conducting some baptisms with water. And the water is cleansing. It's the act of making yourself pure. The science side of water is H2O. And if you've never known this, water is a universal solvent. It's a universal solvent, meaning that it is able to dissolve more substances than any other liquid. And we don't think about it because we drink it and we wash it and everything else. But given time, we wash our clothes in it. Without the water, if you just put the soap in the washing machine, guess what? Nothing much happens. Okay? If you try to wash dishes with just soap, your food's going to taste bad. You got to have the water. We wash our cars. We wash our dishes. We wash ourselves. We wash everything with water. And water is even so powerful as a universal solvent that given time it can break down rocks and mountains and roads and everything. Given time. Look at the Grand Canyon. Jewish life, if you were Jewish, water was very symbolic. And you washed before you worshipped. And this particular person says that there were very extensive laws about cleanliness, which we've talked about. But one of the things before you did worship was you were expected to wash. And they suspect maybe that's why those jars were there empty in the first place, is before the wedding ceremony, people washed. Okay? And they didn't have the things we have. They didn't take a shower before church or whatever. They after they walked someplace, they may not be as pleasant to be around, if you know what I mean. So they would wash as it is the ceremonial cleansing. And if you caught in the scriptures, there was about 180 gallons of water. And following that, I'm going to say wine is a symbol of joy. And 180 gallons is an awful lot of joy. You're going to get a thimble full later, okay? But 180 gallons of wine is a lot of wine. Jesus brought overflowing joy to this wedding because the Jews had a saying, and that was, without wine, there is no joy. Without wine, there is no joy. And I've never been to a Jewish function or anything, but I know that they often have wine at bar mitzvahs and what is it when they pass away, sit shiva and all that, those kinds of things. There's often wine served. Now, a wedding is a symbol of joy. Okay. Whoops, got to go back. Jews had the saying that wine is a symbol of joy. And like I said, keep in mind that they had already ran out of wine. So somebody was being real joyful at the wedding. Okay? And Jesus provided another 180 gallons of wine. Okay? Now, for Jews, drunkenness is a sin. It's okay to have joy, but it was highly looked down upon to be drunk. But this wedding says it was overflowing with joy. And weddings, same as today, are a symbol, but they're not always about just the two people. It's about the gathering of family and community to focus on love and hope and unity. And I don't know how your family works, but as generations go through, you have the births. Okay, and then you have, in the Penzel family, I'll tell you where we had the births. And then we celebrated all the grandkids' confirmations. And then we celebrated their graduations. And then we went to their weddings. Okay, and then it gets down to the really sad part of your life, because the only time I see all my cousins now is when somebody dies. Okay? But that's kind of the cycle of life. But a wedding is one of those pieces of joy in there, of the happiness that you have. It's the gatherings of family and your friends and your communities, and we're on to the great-grandkids now of getting married and celebrating. You celebrate the love of the two people, and you make the connection between Christ and the bridegroom of the church. Okay? If you remember, last week's sermon was about desperation. About before every miracle, there's some kind of desperation. Okay? So here's a little backstory. This turning water to wine wasn't just a party trick. It wasn't something like where you make the funnel and pour the milk in it. It wasn't just a party trick or a magic trick. This period was not a convenience age. You just didn't run to the store and buy some more wine because you were out. The wedding supposedly was a week long. Week long. And running out of something was something for which you could be shamed. And you may look at me funny, but we're the exact same way. Because last year when we hosted Easter and we had all of our food laid out and our 3 great big nephews went through, thank God there was another pan of the casserole on the other, because those 3 went through and Pam and I are going, oh my, there's going to be nothing. And that's still a shame on us. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we ran out of that. How embarrassing. Okay? Same kind of thing. You invited all these people and then you don't provide anything for them. Right? And so to run out of wine would have been a great shame on the family. So when we find ourselves in situations that should bring shame and guilt, is often the times that we recognize Jesus as the rescuer of desperate people. And the first miracle is pretty simple. They just ran out of wine. They were desperate for more wine, but they weren't desperate for their lives. But that's sometimes when we see Jesus the most. Mary seems to be the first one that recognized it. And she looked at Jesus and said, they've ran out of wine. In other words, it's time. Time to be known. And keep in mind, Mary knew everything. Even from down, if you listen to Mary's soliloquy during Advent, when we say Mary kept all these things locked in her heart. She knew everything. And it was no accident that she told the servants to do what Jesus told them to. Do what Jesus told them. She looks at the servants and it says, nearby stood 6 jars. And Jesus says, mine hour has yet not come. And his mother said to the servants, do what he tells you. In other words, shut up, do what he tells you. Don't doubt. Just do it. Okay? And they did. The desperation of the wedding host brought about the first miracle from Jesus. And here's the point for all this. When you're desperate, don't try to hide it. Desperation is where you meet Jesus the most. When we're in good moods and we're happy and everything's going well, we often forget to pray. And we forget to thank God for those kinds of things, but it's when you're desperate and you're worried and you're down is when you meet Jesus the most. And the other message in this is if your vessel is empty like the wine jars, come to Jesus, because he can fill your vessel.